Welcome to the Unlist. This is my summer 2024 fragrance video, but I'm doing it a little bit differently, as you can tell by the title, Summer of Nautica. Last year I did a summer fragrances Unlist, and this year I feel like it's better off just doing something a little different from that, because if I was to make that same video again, very little would change. I haven't bought any different or extra fresh fragrances since last year. So rather than prattle off the same fragrances that I intend to wear this summer, that I already wore last summer, let's focus on an individual brand that tends to be very closely associated with summer. And that brand is Nautica. So for the most part, Nautica is not a brand that gets a lot of esteem in the online fragrance community. Although it is a very familiar, tried and true brand among casual fragrance users, the typical rank and file, the kind of people that most designers until recent years were still catering towards, that average middle income person that just wants a fragrance or two that they can wear in casual, formal, or romantic work situations, whatever. As I've explained in past videos, these days the fragrance market is going further and further upstream. Designers no longer have their eyes on the middle income people because the middle income people are frankly poor now. The income inequality has grown to the point where even people who made what would have been good money 10 years ago can't even afford a place to live, can't even afford a new car, are just barely hanging on for dear life. Grocery bills and utility bills are putting them in the red. And that's with traditionally good paying jobs, which is ridiculous. Not really the subject of a video on this channel, but my point is things are getting pretty desperate for anyone who's not a millionaire. That's more or less what it is. So designers want to make money, so they have to go where the money is, and that means courting millionaires, doubling and tripling their prices, and trying to take the same juice that we've all come to expect and make it dressed up as more exclusive and more expensive than what we know it really is. And people are willing to buy that, then they will buy that until the bottom falls out, right? We've seen that bottom fall out about a century ago during the Great Depression. Maybe the bottom will fall out again. I just hope I'm not homeless if it happens. Because I don't know how I would handle a Great Depression Part 2 at 42 years old, right? Not sure how I'd handle that. But in any case, Nautica is still one of those brands that tends to court that middle income audience. And you can tell by where their fragrances tend to be sold. They tend to be sold in discounters. They tend to be sold in big box stores like Walmart. They tend to be sold in your high street or shopping mall perfume places, your Perfume Mania, Perfume Galleria, that sort of thing, right? They are just very commonly available perfumes. So places like Fred Meyer and such, Kohl's, JCPenney's, those dying middle income chains, like I said, even they are going out. So pretty soon there's going to be nothing below a Nordstrom and above a Walmart, nothing in the middle because of the way things are going. Again, though, I digress. Nautica still targets that particular group, and they therefore have a lot of respect with the average working Joe, right? They are fresh. They perform reliably. They, at least from an objective standpoint, they smell good. Stylistically, a lot of frag heads and connoisseurs and perfumistos hate their stuff because it's very commercial. It's very dialed in for a purpose. It's just like, you know, ketchup and mustard. It's the plain yellow mustard and the plain Heinz ketchup. It's not the fancy Dijon mustard or the stone ground stuff. It's not your sriracha ketchup. It's not your artisanal gastropub thing, right? So from a subjective taste perspective, yeah, Nautica is pretty banal for a lot of people. But from an objective standpoint, in terms of pleasantness and functionality, you can't really argue. It's Nautica's game is airtight in that regard. And I don't care what anyone says. Let all the snobs, all the weirdos who wear 33 sprays of Naxos, let them come at me, right? Y'all are just strange and sad if you can't recognize the fact that a vast majority of people are happy with a very basic, well-functioning product, okay? Some people still eat Wonder Bread on their sandwiches. That's fine. Let them fucking have Wonder Bread. If they want a goddamn loaf of Wonder Bread, doesn't have to be Dave's Killer Bread with all the crazy grains on it. They just want some Wonder Bread and some bologna and some yellow cheese and some normal ketchup or mayonnaise or whatever on that sandwich. Lettuce, tomato, and onions. That's all they want. Let them have it, okay? There's nothing wrong with that. And that's about where I stand with Nautica. I don't own any because I recognize that I am someone with a more discerning taste. I am someone with a more refined, educated palate, and I find them boring. But me finding Nautica fragrances boring is in no way, shape, or form any kind of knock on their quality. It's not a knock on what they do and how they do it. It's just saying that I've moved on from Budweiser beer, okay? I've moved on from standard sitcoms, okay? I like my weird B-horror movies, and I like my microbrews and all of that stuff. My taste has definitely developed more into a corner, okay? But it's fine. It's fine, guys. It's fine. It's fine. So Nautica is a very representative brand for summertime fragrance usage because, well, it's Nautica, okay? The word Nautica is a play on an actual Greek word, nauticus, which, you know, obviously deals with nautical things, deals with the ocean. So the founder of Nautica is a Taiwanese guy, and I'm probably going to butcher his name because if you think I'm bad at French, imagine me trying to say something in Mandarin or Cantonese. It's just not going to work. Okay, I have even less knowledge base of that than I do of French, but if I get the pinyin correct, if I'm pronouncing the pinyin the way it's spelled on paper, looks like it's his name was David Zhu or Zhu Kinki. Okay, so let's just go with David Zhu. Let's go with his Anglicized name, but Zhu Kinki looks like his actual Chinese name. But David Zhu founded Nautica in 1983, 84-ish. Years are a bit wonky on that. Nautica was originally not a standalone designer brand. It was a line of jackets that was sort of like a store brand, right? I know you guys are thinking, what store brand? But yeah, there was a period of time in the 80s where some of your higher end department stores, like your Bloomingdale's, like your Nordstrom, okay, like your Saks Fifth Avenue, your Lord & Taylor, they would have their own in-store lines. And they were still high priced, granted. This is not Walmart. We're still talking high-end department store threads, but cheaper than any of the actual designers that would be sold in the store. So obviously, if you can't afford an exorbitant Chanel, you can't afford a Christian Dior jacket, you can't afford anything of that ilk, right? Even like a Tommy Hilfiger or a Calvin Klein, a little lower down the peg, right? You could always spring for a Nordstrom jacket. Fine quality, you know, at least as far as sweatshop work goes, right? Fine quality sweatshop work, but expensive enough to feel like it's something better than you'd get from a Kmart, right? Something better than you'd get from a Kohl's, but obviously not in their boutique selections. And that's what the Nautica line was. And it was not branded as Nautica, it was branded as whatever the store wanted to brand it. So Bloomingdale's had their own thing. Nordstrom had their own thing. However, the orders for David Zhu's designs increased to the point where he said, hey, people love my stuff so much, why don't I just brand it and sell it as a brand, right? And thus, it was launched as Nautica. And it stayed in those same stores, okay? And it stayed expensive. But now he could also launch boutiques with Nautica on the sign and have the stuff sold there. I don't know if they still have Nautica boutiques anymore because Nautica has now gone down market a lot. But in the 80s, And in the early 90s, when the first fragrance was launched, right, in 92, Nautica was considered good shit. It was considered expensive. Nautica back then, okay, in the 80s and 90s, Nautica back then is basically the equivalent of what something like a high-end camping brand, like, let me think of one. I don't really know. I don't really buy this sort of stuff, but like Columbia, I guess, but higher end than Columbia, you know, like a Uniqlo kind of thing. Like, it was a more expensive brand, but it was a boutique brand. It wasn't an individual, my name on the sign. It was Nautica, and it was outdoorsy, and it was marine themed and all that stuff, jackets and shoes and whatnot, windbreakers. But it was considered a flex. You would wear Nautica and you'd flex it in the 80s and 90s. Nowadays, it's, if you wear Nautica anything, it's clearly not a flex. But, you know, it was back then. But it was definitely the outdoorsy type, the REI type of person, the Subaru driving guy, you know, the guy who eats beef jerky, right? That sort of thing. But just the nautical version of that. Now, the first fragrance came out in 1992, and it was created by a guy who's very, very obscure. I don't know anything about him, but Robert Guardelli. Robert Guardelli. So definitely an Italian guy, but he is credited with creating the Nautica composition. And the original manufacturer of the Nautica fragrances was Paul Sebastian, okay? Or PSI, Paul Sebastian International. So Paul Sebastian was a New Jersey-based fragrance house. They didn't actually have anything but fragrances. It's a weird story. I could do a video on it by itself, but basically two New Jersey businessmen that wanted to create a custom fragrance for themselves because they were cologne guys in the late 70s. And then they rolled out this Paul Sebastian fragrance that they hooked up with a perfumer and had created. But because they had no fashion name, they had no one knew who they were. The only way they could get this fragrance in stores was to put it with a gift. So all of the early Paul Sebastian bottles were gift with purchase. So you had the bottle of cologne and a mug, bottle of cologne and a scarf, bottle of cologne and a teddy bear, whatever. And it worked. Folks bought it. Stocking stuffers for Christmas. They made a fortune doing that and eventually launched many other fragrances. All of them discontinued now, but Paul Sebastian eventually got gobbled up by Elizabeth Arden. But before that happened, they were something of a powerhouse unto themselves. In the early 90s, they were at the top of their game, and they agreed to launch the Nautica fragrance in 92. Now, I kind of have a checkered history with the original Nautica fragrance because in 1992, I was 11 years old. And by the mid-90s, the late 90s, when I was 14, 15, 16, right, I was in high school in 96. I was a freshman in 96. And yeah, Nautica was kind of everywhere. It was kind of sort of everywhere. The same sort of way that Tommy Hilfiger, the Tommy cologne, was everywhere. And that was from 94, by the way. Tommy cologne's from 94, 2 years after Nautica. And then the Versace blue jeans, also 94, was everywhere. And Curve came out that year in 96, and it would eventually become everywhere. By the time I was a junior, you know, so we're talking 98, 99, I was a junior, senior. Curve was everywhere. But when I was that freshman and then sophomore, man, you couldn't escape. You could not escape Nautica because the fragrance, for whatever reason, didn't have the exclusive distribution that the clothes did. See, this is where I think they fucked up. I think the whole fragrance house, separate from the fashion brands, developed a down market reputation, and then it dragged the clothing. I think the fragrance literally dragged the clothing down to hell. It was like the movie Drag Me to Hell with the witch casting, the gypsy witch casting the curse on the lady because she wouldn't remortgage her house for her or whatever. That whole thing, that whole Drag Me to Hell thing, that's what happened. So there was a curse put on. The fragrance put a curse, man, on that fashion house, you know, because it was sold everywhere. It was sold in your Kmart's. Again, it was sold in your Fred Meyer places, your Boscov's, all right, your J.C. Penney's, that thing, Heck Company when they existed. Those of you who remember Heck Company, Woolworth, remember Woolworth? Nautica was in all those places. Rite Aid, everywhere. Even grocery stores that had some kind of fragrance eventually had Nautica. So they shot themselves in the foot. They went for that easy money, that quick distribution. And they got it. And every grubby teenager looking to have sex, looking to get laid, had a bottle of Nautica by 96 when I was starting high school. Every single fucking one of them. And it just was a miasma cloud of this fragrance. So any aesthetic quality of it being fresh and light and marine and oceanic and all this lovely stuff was just screwed by how oversaturated it became, how everywhere it was. Inescapable. So, but separated from that personal experience, if I were to look at it from the outside looking in, it's a pleasant fragrance. Nautica really sort of was a precursor to CK1 by Calvin Klein. So whatever Robert Guardelli did, whatever he did, that anonymous perfumer, whatever he did, it seems like Alberto Morillas and Harry Fremont were paying close attention to whatever he was doing, because they began incorporating some of the themes of Nautica into CK1, namely that very thick, fluffy, white musk, jasmine, hedione sort of thing that's in CK1 and would eventually be in Hannah More as well, would be in Paco by Paco Rabanne, would be in Chrome by Azzaro. Okay, that whole fluffy white hedione tonka thing, okay, that fresh, clean linen dryer sheets kind of vibe. People attribute that to CK1, and yes, CK1 was the first fragrance to really focus on that, but it makes its debut appearance in Nautica. And then Nautica surrounds it with lavender, surrounds it with sage. There's some, not really a true aquatic fragrance, guys. I don't get much dihydromercenol or ambroxan in Nautica. Not the original one, guys, not the original one. That one's built up more like a fougere, more like a chypre. It's a woody, floral fragrance that has aesthetic qualities of a maritime theme. So it has maritime aesthetics, but I would not call it a proper aquatic. Now, Nautica would launch a bunch of things after that, and Halston Borghese, which Halston Borghese is the house that was the brain trust for Halston Fragrances for J.C. Penney. So this is another like mid-tier department store, but Halston Borghese, who was in control of the Halston brand, and thus all the J.C. Penney Halston fragrances, including Halston Limited, and eventually all that other stuff, you know, Halston Man, all those. Before Elizabeth Arden bought them, okay, they ended up getting the Nautica license from PSI, because PSI would be itself bought by Halston Borghese. So Halston Borghese would buy Paul Sebastian, and through that they would get Nautica. You'd see Competition, Latitude, all these other ones come out, and most of them would just be ignored by people. They weren't as interesting, they were too boring. Fast forward to the early 2000s, guys, and eventually Elizabeth Arden would buy up Halston Borghese. And through Elizabeth Arden, Halston will become an Arden brand. Paul Sebastian will become an Arden brand. But Nautica would go on the chopping block, because Nautica, by the early 2000s, had fallen so far down market already, just decades' time, that EA didn't want it. So Coty eventually grabbed it. Yeah, Coty grabbed it. And when Coty grabbed Nautica, that's when we get the Maurice Roussel compositions that a lot of y'all like to talk about. Nautica Voyage and Nautica Blue. Same year, 2006. Nautica Blue has the same bottle as the original Nautica and was meant to be its replacement, actually. But people disliked Nautica Blue so much that it forced Coty to actually gas chromatography, spectral analyze the original Nautica. They couldn't get the formula of the original Nautica, because the formula for the original Nautica was owned by Elizabeth Arden, because they bought Halston Borghese, right? Who bought Paul Sebastian. So that formula was locked behind that iron curtain. Cody wasn't going to deal with Elizabeth Arden. Elizabeth Arden was certainly not going to deal with Cody. So Cody had to like get a bottle of old Nautica and, you know, use chromatography on it and figure it out, and then recreate the original Nautica, because no one liked blue. I guess they liked it enough that it wasn't discontinued, but it definitely did not do the sales. It did not do the sales. So for a little while, the original Nautica was put out to pasture. Then it was reintroduced as Classic, Nautica Classic in 2006. And it would restore people's faith, I guess, in Nautica. Meanwhile, blue was not really all that interesting. Like I said, same bottle. The problem with Nautica Blue is Maurice Roussel created Nautica Blue as really kind of like an afterthought. Like he was just kind of going through the motions, didn't really care with that fragrance. It smelled very generic. You could very easily mistake it for any other aquatic from that time period. You know, all the Bulgari stuff, any of that stuff. Nautica Blue could be mistaken for any of those. Very boring fragrance. Voyage, on the other hand, Voyage ended up having a lot of fans, because Voyage smelled like a more commercialized version of Beyond Paradise. If you've smelled Estee Lauder Beyond Paradise from 2004, very futuristic, fruity, sheer, grape leaf in that, violet fruit notes, thin woody veneer, ambroxan base, very futuristic, very high concept stuff. Callus Becker made Beyond Paradise, both the women's and the men's version. But the men's version was a bit too weird, I think, for the average guy. So Maurice Roussel effectively tamed that fragrance. He cut out a lot of the weird bits. The grape leaf went bye-bye, the violet accord went bye-bye. A lot of the abstract florals, a lot of the floral notes that were in Beyond Paradise were cut out. And in their place, you got a lot of green apple, a lot of melon, more jasmine hedione. You got the hydromyrcenol, you got ambroxan, you got kalone out the waz, lots of kalone. But it's a very sharp, very punchy, sweet, but also a little bit sour, and very well projecting fragrance, okay? Very, very, very high performing fragrance. In fact, Nautica Voyage was effectively the Tommy for the 2000s, okay? Nautica Voyage is for the 2000s, 2006 and forward, what Tommy Cologne was for the 90s, okay? That's the impact it had. And that's why a lot of guys nowadays, you know, almost 20 years later, that's why guys swear by it so much. I don't think it's that great. I would rather, honestly, I would rather wear the Beyond Paradise. I'd rather wear the Callus Becker composition. I got rid of my Voyage. I had a bottle of Voyage, and it went away. I understand it. I get it. I know why it's appreciated, but I like things a little more strange, right? Again, it's just too much dialed into the kind of person who doesn't want all that extra weirdness. They don't want the fussy bits. They want the straight and the narrow. Nautica Voyage is basically the straight and narrow version of Beyond Paradise. Beyond Paradise is the weird, exploratory, experimental one. So there you guys have it, man. The summer of Nautica. If you just want good, potent, reliable, fresh, clean, nothing to really get nervous about, fragrances that are going to carry you through June, July, August, early September, Nautica is a brand for you. It's, you know, low brain cell, like I said, no effort, just spray, sachet, and walk away, and you're good. For me, not my thing, but I'm making a video on it just for those who want to know what my take on the brand is, and it's a summer themed video. This has been The Unlist, and thanks for watching.